thanks very much. And this is I think the third DECC seminar that Demanders run, and we've been moving topics as we go along. So I've seen some of you when we've been talking about other kinds of issues. But this time it's a chance to think about heating and to tell you something about our work, which is, Demanders is a really interesting centre. I've got some postcards to tell you more about it. But one of the reasons, partly why it's interesting, is the kind of slightly unusual combination of disciplines involved. So Frank's a historian, I'm a sociologist, and we've got geographers as well involved in, and other people from across the social sciences, thinking in this case about pathways to central heating. So our kind of core questions are that, or our starting point is that people don't use energy just for the hell of it. You know, patterns of energy consumption relate to systems of provision, to infrastructures, and to changing expectations of what counts as comfortable in this case. So more specifically, we're interested in this talk in thinking about what kind of previous transitions towards central heating, are there lessons and insights that might be relevant for other future anticipated transitions, including those towards some kind of decarbonised system. So I'm just going to, it's quite a long talk.
If you nod at me,
I can, yeah, all right, I'll do that, yeah. So here's a graph from ETI, which shows what those of you involved in heat kind of know already, which is the complete collapse of red, which stands in this case for gas boilers, gas central heating, and the rise of the kind of heat pump, electric heating, and sort of district heating or heat methods over not very long. So that's a kind of sense of a scale, a rate of change. Next one, and this one you'll know from DECC is a kind of diagram which shows how those bars are going to be achieved. And so this, for those who haven't seen it, this kind of wedge is the disappearance of gas central heating. Being kind of overtaken from the top by the heat networks in the dense areas and overtaken or squeezed in a way from the bottom by electric heat pumps or heat pumps. So that's the scenario, and that's the scenario of how the scenario is going to appear. Next one shows us, or is about introducing our kind of work where, as I say, we're going to look back at the previous, it's not the same kind of rate, actually, and it's perhaps not the same kind of transition, but it's certainly substantial move in types of heating. So our questions are, looking back at the move from coal to gas or electric, or from space heating to central heating, our questions are, which relate to today, are about how infrastructures, fuels, appliances, and sort of everyday practices change together. How are systems and technologies of all sorts, not just heating, but also clothing, electric blankets, space, you'll see how we go, how they combine and also removed, because the housing, the built stock out there is there already. You know, this is about the process of adaptation, it's not all about building new. And how are methods of keeping warm interlocked with the rhythms and patterns of the day where people are at home and work and these kinds of changes. And also what they do in the home. What is a home for? This turns out to be quite important. So the policy relevance of all of this is to be discussed. In other words, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but I'm going to set out some ideas that I think are really important for thinking about that wedge shape that you're apparently keen on. So now I'm going to come here because I'm going to do it faster. The nodding, good work. This is a sort of very in-outline kind of time-lapse photography type effort at representing where we start, which is with a coal fire and one electric appliance. And then very briefly, some of you know, there are sort of park-raised stoves, or the fire gets put in a box and gets a bit more efficient and so on. And then after a bit you get a radiator connected to the park ray, that's how that goes. And then actually the solid fuel system goes. At the back, in the background somewhere, there's some kind of other, gas central heating system. So the flowers arrive in the place of the coal in the fireplace. You spot a few more electric sockets coming in, and then in a way even the fireplace goes and the television sort of. So that would be a fairly simple, perhaps a too simple, now you can take over, kind of sequence that just shows you a shifting kind of, repertoire of technologies coming into the picture. None of that tells us about how people lived in those kinds of houses. It doesn't tell us anything about the meaning of home or what did those changes mean. I mean, the coal fire was tremendously time intensive. Okay, so what happened to the time? All these kinds of shifts we need to think about. So and I'm going to tell you in just a second about the type of work we did, but what we wanted to explore was not one simple technological history, as I've just shown you in the time-lapse thing, but at least 3 parallel, overlapping, interweaving, intersecting kinds of narratives. One is indeed about fuels and heating systems and provision. What are councils providing as normal? What is out there? What do people actually have by way of heating systems? But also how they get included in the life of a building, how a building changes over time. You'll see spaces being knocked through and so on. It's not just about the fire. And then about the changing experience of people and households across the life. That was our challenge. So methodologically, how are we going to get there? And next one, yeah. It's not as straightforward as you might think, because you have to find some technique of kind of matching the life courses of people with the life courses of the homes they're in, with a kind of bigger trends over time as well. So our practical strategy was to focus on 2 locations. I mean, what I'm telling you now is only one part of a bigger project, but anyway, this was our approach. 2 locations, one Stevenage and the other Stocksbridge. So Stevenage is not very far from here, and both of these were selected because they really had excellent archives, not for any terribly good set of other reasons, apart from a few others. One is that Stevenage was deliberately planned, and so it's just a dream in terms of a lot of documentation and very clear ideas about what housing should be and what the future was and these kinds of issues. Stocksbridge, which is outside Sheffield, is the council housing we're looking at is older, but it's possible to start in both of those locations and get the plans of the houses when they were new and get more information about the ideas and aspirations about what the council was providing, what constituted a normal home at these different moments of construction. So Anna, who's been working with Frank, has been into these archives extensively, discovering the kinds of debates and arguments about should there be a fire, should there not, should there be electric sockets, how many, really a huge amount of detail. And also some further sort of surveys about what the tenants liked or how they responded to these systems when they were new, partly when they were new. But that's not enough. We also want to know this process of kind of creeping adaptation, and we want to know how people lived with those systems and what they did and how they changed them and when they changed them and why, this kind of stuff. So we've also done, not a huge number, but a number of oral histories with people. So the sort of sociologists went to the very homes that Anna, the historian, found in the council archives, or at least exactly the same estates, kind of knocked on the doors or went to the local history societies and found people who had lived in those types of homes and talked with them. Now again, that's not quite as straightforward as it might sound, because obviously people move house a lot. So if you went to that estate, opened the door, they might have no understanding of what the changes that had gone on over a longer period of time. So we had to sort of take account of that, and we had to take account as well of the fact that how people live in a house depends on their circumstances. Have they got children? Are they elderly? Whatever. And obviously that changes over the life course. So our kind of strategy was to select respondents who are, and this is from a variety of sources like the local history society, but not only that, who are of different ages today, but we focused our questions mostly on the period when they were setting up home. And because we tried to pick people who are different ages today, we were able to some extent, you see what I mean, we're trying to hold some of these features stable so that we can investigate the period of setting up home, when that happens in people of different ages, but in these house types which are largely the ones that we're able to follow over time. And the questions focused on a number of issues, keeping warm in winter, heating water, which I'm not going to talk about, but it's very interesting, and laundry, which I'm going to ignore as well. So just the next one. This just shows you the kind of map. It, in a way, gives you the detail of who we spoke to, their ages, and now, and the kind of periods that we were able to discuss with them. I mean, it's kind of demonstrating also some of the challenges of doing this, both cohort work and life course work and infrastructure in practice kind of work. You have to go to some lengths to catch that exact intersection between how people live in their homes, bearing these other features in mind. Anyway, that's what we did. So the next one gives you a sense of some of the, in a way, not too surprising things that we found. I'm going to work down this line of little pictures here. They're simplified 2 up, 2 down houses, so upstairs, downstairs. It's a very crude. The round thing means an open fire, and the block means a radiator. So, more or less, and none of this is exactly corresponding to decades, so we'll come on to that in a minute. But very, very simply, in a way, there's one solid fuel, open fireplace, then you get a radiator, then you get all sorts of other little bits and pieces of heating, bar fires and gas heaters and paraffin heaters creeping about the space. But you can see the blue indicates roughly that it's freezing cold in winter. And so the space of the home that's being heated and how it's heated is a kind of dynamic, it's changing. And in different ways and in different sort of moments. Now the key thing I think is that this changes the nature of the house. So it's the space that you should be focusing on. So by the time you get to the full central heating at the bottom, all rooms are somewhat equal temperature. I mean, that's changed what you can do in a house. That's a really important point. Here's some of the detail of specifically what was where, and I mean, in a way, I've showed you some of that with the time-lapse little show. But the point is that heating creeps around the house in a rather erratic, kind of funny sort of way. It matters for how homes are used. It matters for the detail of daily life. And that heating systems, well, I'll come on to that, are used in different ways. That's still pretty much about heating, although along the way there are a few other features about duvets arriving from the continent and other kinds of changes, which turn out to be, I'll say a little bit more about that, they turn out to be quite important. For now, it's something, the point to take is that space, heating changes the space, the useful space, the meaning of living in a home quite a lot. So that's one kind of story about systems of provision and what's there. The next story, next one, is to kind of make a bit more closer use of this combination of oral history stuff with house data, and show how one house type, it's like the life story of a house. Although I have to say it's a house type, so it's the B24 from Stevenage. If you know Stevenage, it's got this house type called B24, so there's quite a lot of them. And but it's not one B24, so it's obviously a composite from our interviews of people who now live and have lived in B24s at different points over time. But you can see, so what happened, well, you can see from the next slide, we had the plans from the original, from the council, from Stevenage, and this was what they were provided with in 1960. Solid fuel fire in the lounge, back boiler, radiator in the kitchen, and a fuel store, and that was the B24. Next one shows a B24 as it was adapted only 10 years later or so. So things are on the move. Gas fire, there's different kind of shifting around. The number of power sockets has gone up. There's a twin tub in the kitchen, and there's a fridge and a larder, and the store is still there, but it's not used for fuel in the same way. So there are some kind of adaptations going on, indicating not only more appliances, but different uses of the room, as well as the different heating systems. The next one shows one kind of trajectory of development with the B24 in 1983. So these are based on interviews with people who were living in a house like that, who were asked to draw from memory, what was in their home and how it was laid out, because that was a way to see how this sort of incremental change has gone on. And in this case, various things that you might recognise: a bathroom has been knocked into a room, there's a shower, there's a phone, there's quite a load more power points as far as people can remember. And there's other kind of appliances, so the twin boiler's gone, there's a kind of automatic machine. These are things you know, but they're kind of layering on top of each other, they're happening together temporally at specific kind of points in time. The next one has got, it's a different house, so it's taken a slightly different course. This has got actually storage heaters and a gas fire. It's an absolute blizzard of power sockets. And a kind of the store area has been turned into a study, and it's all been opened up in a more open, or some of it has been opened up in a more open plan kind of way. And upstairs there's been some more converted there. So we kind of know that this is going on, but to have this kind of detail lets you see something of this, as I say, this interweaving of what's counting as a normal home and how that is kind of co-evolving with its heating system. Okay. So from the experiences of interviewing people, and this is more than not just the B24, that was the life of one, that was one way of showing you, but across the board, then there's a sort of number of general themes. One is that obviously central heating was a key feature of that, was the experience of rooms being at the similar, not quite, but the potential to achieve similar temperatures. A very strong feature was the experience of using fuels that you just turn a switch rather than carry, chop, load, store, these kinds of things. And then, of course, which we haven't really gone into here, but the relationship between cooking and heating and hot water is also branching. So with a solid fuel range, that's one device that does all of those three in one. And it's now kind of got parcelled out to different types of appliances across the home. That's gone on over this period. So, but we can also see, and from the B24 stories very clearly, that central heating follows and enables, so it's not quite clear which way round, but other changes. What is the kitchen? Is it a living room, or is it just a kitchen, or is it the laundry in the kitchen? What's happening where? And the larder has disappeared, and the store has become a study. And these are all connected to how that property is actually, to what heating is and how it's used. And the next slide goes through some of the people in Stocksbridge especially were really kind of 80s and 90s, fairly, have really long heating histories and heating lives and heating experiences. And Leneke, who was talking with them, in a way got an incredibly strong sense of the difference of the world of upstairs. So this is sort of rewinding, but if you don't have heating at all upstairs, which was quite, as we've seen, quite normal until relatively, well, to the 60s in these houses, then you don't go up there unless you're prepared with hot water bottles and blankets and everything. So you only do one thing up there usually, which is sleeping. So these other kinds of, the idea of what the house is for is kind of here clear. And then the duvet, there were quite a lot of people who talked about duvets, which isn't normally, I don't expect DECC has got a duvet policy. But in some senses...
Give them any ideas.
Yeah, I said policy relevance discuss, yeah. But in some senses, that was one of the stronger kind of features of the experience of living with or without heating systems in the bedroom. So don't ignore those kinds of features, basically. So upstairs and downstairs, very different kind of way of life. But also this idea, again, quite commonly discussed in the interviews, but not the connection's not made explicit, of knocking through. So knocking through the living room and the dining room, or knocking through an open plan. That would be balmy if you'd only got one solid fuel fire. So there's something about how the whole architecture of the housing stock out there with this knocking through is shaped by full central heating in the way that we've got to know, and the idea of a shared living room and so on. Now the next one was also, again, not fully a surprise, but it came as a surprise when you read it, which was about the temporal and spatial significance of the television coming in the early 50s, coming in some of these houses it's about, or, you know, from then till the 60s, some of the same sort of time as central heating. And again, there's a strong relationship. So it's quite, having a television, watching it is quite sedentary. You're sitting
still. It's a secondary heater, isn't it, basically? It's a secondary heater, basically.
Well, a bit, but what was happening was that which room was the television going in? And it was the kitchen that had the fire, not the front room. So if you're going to be warm and watch the television, and it's going to be in the front room, you've got to heat another room. So I'm not saying that the television kind of drove central heating, but it's not, the use of space is not, you know, it's not just heating and it's not just the television, it's the conjunction of the two. And so this is quite clear. Somebody's saying, you know, we've first got, I tell you, that's when you started using the living room, and you wouldn't just heat the living room just to watch the television. So there's all sorts of conjunctions going on here, which are crucial for the use of space and then the next thing, which is again easy to forget, it's not just the duvet, but some of these respondents, when reflecting on the normal way of life pre-central heating, so oh yes, finally you get to the interview, and of course there were the vests. Of course there were the vests. That was normal. That was completely part of it. And they've gone. So there's something also about this kind of narrative which is about disappearance and the loss of skills and systems, which is part of this story. Okay, so those are some experiences from the sort of, you know, respondents' accounts of the practicalities of space, of living, of handling those configurations of the home and its heating system somewhat over time. Now, there's a few reminders I want to make from our work. So this kind of quite colourful map, each row represents one respondent's experience. So I'll take this row to example. This person, who was obviously quite old, so different people are at different ages, that's why the bars are kind of start at a different point, had experience of a coal fire up to here, and then gas hot air, and then gas central heating. So that's how you get how the diagram works. Now I think the interesting thing from a kind of, is to look at both the persistence and the erratic nature of the blue, which is the coal fire. So it doesn't just disappear, some are still functioning today. The other thing which is intriguing is this electric storage, which is the yellow, has a clear kind of heyday. I mean, it's not that many respondents, but nonetheless you can see there's a kind of, you know, decade or so when it's quite dominant. And you can see with the dark red, you can see central heating becoming established, but it's a strong reminder that there are many other systems out there coexisting with that, and it didn't happen all at once, and it wasn't, you know, that wedge thing that the kind of arrival of or the disappearance of central heating and the arrival of heat pumps. If this is a kind of pattern from our pieces of work, but we tried to piece these pieces together quite carefully, then it's colourful, patchy, and that's an important reminder. There's lots of different systems still out there, and they're not going to go away. The next one is also a reminder, some complicated little quotations, but it's a reminder that people in the course of their lives, and as the map showed, they move between one system and the next. They don't always have one kind of technology. And if you have a notion of back and forth, which is a bit weird, but you would move back and forth between central heating or not central heating. Certainly people who move around rental properties do that all the time. A second point, so these are just extracts from sort of the life course of sort of heating life course of a couple of respondents, moving from a single coal fire to hot air central heating. But then, interestingly, this person then just shut it off. They just didn't like it. So having an infrastructure, having a system, does not mean that it's being used. And this, again, is repeated quite frequently. Whereas the guy over there, he grew up with a Yorkshire range, just heating in the kitchen. Then there seems to be a strong connection with his wife getting pregnant and the kind of introduction of different systems. So they change a gas fire when there's the first child and central heating with the second child. And then central heating becomes established. So, yeah, as I say, there's movement between systems, systems coexist, but not all of them are used. In the fact that they're there doesn't guarantee that they're used. Right, next reminder, which is a little bit related, is that systems are not on all the time. And again, this is blindingly obvious, but patterns of heating relate to other rhythms of the day. And so this is this is from, I think, one of the Stevenage respondents, where we were looking at not just what the heating was, but when it's on, and when other appliances are on. And so these orange blocks are the radiators glowing nicely when they're on. And there's at 6:45 there's some bread machine busy doing its stuff in this particular house. And then lots of other activity and different uses of space as the family gets up. So you have to think of the heating system as part of a living system of the day. It's not just there, it's not just on or off, it's connected to all these other activities and the temporal ordering of those. So the next one is the kind of, this is a sort of summary of everything I've said this far. Keeping warm across the decades, yes, there's some kind of dominant systems of provision. Yes, technologies have definitely changed, but they're not in general. So the specific configuration is particular to different houses, like B24, and that gets adapted. And it gets adapted in ways that link with personal histories, which are also erratic and complicated because people move and they have children. All of that in general, I think, has pointed to some pretty strong issues about where things are happening, the use of space in the home and how that changes. And it's not just from one room to full central heating. It's more complicated than that, like with the television and these other kinds of arrangements. It's clear that the kind of rhythms, I mean, I haven't said much, but the work of the coal fire and when it was lit depended on who was at home or at work at the time. It's clear that adapting heating goes on all the time, that there are other technologies, the duvets, the blankets, the hot water bottles, which are part of the system of keeping warm. They're not separate from it. There's the use of space within the home, but even micro things like the larder or the store, or power sockets or knocking through rooms. And then, of course, there are some really strong written down formal guidelines, Parker Morris standards and other sort of housing association standards about what should be provided, and they have a role to play here as well. So what does any of that mean for the future? And the next one is just basically another version. This is from UKIRK, showing again the disappearance of the gas boiler, which is this kind of shape here, and the arrival of others. And the trouble, in a way, with this kind of representation, as with the other two that I began with, is that it's just about the fuel. It doesn't tell you anything about the kind of catalogue of issues that I've just tried to open up for you. Next one is then to say, well, if we took the scenarios that apparently you're keen on, how can we read them in terms of this account of the complexity, if you like, of daily life and heating? And in effect, there are, I think, two sort of not equal scenarios or different kind of models here. So a notion of a heat network is that, in a way, you've got the full central heating system and it's completely invisible. You just plug another source of supply into it and everything else stays exactly the same. All space heated, no chance. However, so that's okay for the urban sites. But the others, the heat pumps, well, they're not, at the moment, actually mimicking exactly full on-demand gas central heating. They will be perfectly okay for some kind of background heating and some kind of topping up, given different situations, so depending on the insulation as well. In a way, they're more like some of the earlier systems of heating provision in action than this kind of full gas central heating. So the next one sort of might indicate that actually this model is not pointing to the disappearance of gas central heating and the persistence of one model still based on gas central heating, the idea of full space heating, but actually there's some new, as yet under thought through, opening up of a different proliferation of a variety of different, configurations and methods of keeping warm. So yes, the district heat networks might reproduce full central heating model, but maybe the heat pumps is another kind of configuration of the house, another configuration of space, another way of living in this property would be different. Next one. So I was then I just started making things up from here on, including imagining, could we write some future heating lives in a future fiction kind of way? Could we imagine somebody who grew up in Stocksbridge with gas central, who was born in 2000, who lived with their in-laws for 10 years, well, some things don't, that's quite likely probably, but then adapts to this, not just the heat pump, but the merino bodywear, which is government subsidised, and radiator, and has disabled the control system completely because it doesn't fit the kind of complexity of the working life. Or would we have another scenario? I mean, I have just made these up, right? But gas central heating, fine. District heating for a while in a flat, move away. At last, back in the country with an ordinary wood-burning stove. Another coexisting system. So that's just kind of a reminder about being patchy, but also about, this is consistent to some extent with the previous transition, so it's not it is fully made up, but the idea is not fully made up. Next one. I guess the conclusions are, thinking about the future of heating, is that you can't think about it as a topic in its own right without thinking also about the future uses of the home or the future of space and temporal rhythms and these other technologies. You would have to recognise, as all of the kind of slides have indicated, that the future is shaped by the past and the present. And one of the big dilemmas is, in a way, the dominance of full gas central heating in the imagination. As a model, the idea of 22 degrees C throughout the house has become a gold standard template which nothing else can fully achieve apart from perhaps the heat networks, and that might be problematic and questionable. And that's a very recent development. So one of the longer term challenges is to break away from the hegemony of that one size fits all kind of normal model, which will be quite a challenge, I would say. But it's also obvious that the future of heating is being made in lots of different places, not just in DECC, but by councils and heating systems providers and industry and standards and other actors. I think this exercise has pointed out these different kinds of scenarios, like the heat pump scenario might involve some reconfigured notion of what is normal in terms of warmth and how that's provided, and that there is a tension between running with that and running with the sort of normal gold standard full central heating, and that might need thinking about. Or you just go blue in the face trying to make heat pumps match something which they're not, which is a real problem too. So there are no policy implications or recommendations that I'm going to fully draw out, but I would say it is important, whatever you're thinking of doing, to recognise these multiple dimensions of heating lives. I don't know what it means to recognise, I have to learn more what you're doing to know the significance of that. To think about the diversity that exists out there now in methods of keeping warm and in uses of space, and to think about how these infrastructures and practices, so it's just not about consumer acceptance. I don't even need to say that really, that's so obvious from everything that I've said, I would say. So I'll finish there.